Yeah. All right. So, K through 2, thank you so much for coming through for us. Miss Apperson was going to be doing this, and she graciously allowed me to come in because I needed to present for a class that I'm doing. So I appreciate that support from Miss Apperson.
Of course.
And one of the things we did was we went and spoke to Miss Wissinger, and we realized that with literacy stations, you all have, K1 and 2 have a huge writing prompt coming up this year. And so we thought that that would be one of the good ones to start with. We sent out the poll asking you what stations you were interested in. And we actually had a tie between spelling, grammar to writing, and the third one was concept of word. So we're going to present as a group for the grammar to writing, and then we can split up for it. If you wanted to do spelling stations, you'll go with Miss Apperson, and if you want to do concept of word, then you're going to come with me. And then we would discuss those separately. So, because we're pretty fancy, we have created some files. What we did was Miss Wissinger came through and gave us the prompts that we have coming up. We all recognize that we have a fairly large first writing prompt that's due at the beginning, I think, in the next, what, month?
Yeah.
Next month. So we have specifically targeted that writing prompt and broken it up into a small literacy station to kind of support those teachers who may be having some difficulties. We also recognize that we've obviously got kids that are across the board, so we have attempted to tier it as well. So we have kindergarten files, first grade files, and second grade files. So I am going to, and you may keep these. If you do not have enough, then that is okay because we can create more for you. Are those first? Okay. So we're going to start with the kindergarten, and we're trying to. Look at that. All right. Okay. So. And I'll try and be brief because obviously I recognize that kindergarten is only specific to the kindergarten teachers. But one of the things we did try and do was create some kind of conformity on all of the things. So you will see that across the board for kindergarten, first and second grade, the thought process is you'll have one day where you're modeling, you're showing them what we're looking for, and they're actually going to be checking to see what they're looking for. The second day will be based on them doing part of the activity independently, and the third day will be having as much independence as we feel like they can manage. So in the kindergarten folder, you will see that there are some sentences already written. Now the prompt for kindergarten is based on a kindergartner can. We recognize, so what we try to do is we try to assimilate the idea of what a kindergartner can by giving them different samples of what other people can. So by the time you hit that kindergarten prompt, they have an understanding of what the expectation is. So if we look at the first page, oh, there we go. So on the first day, you don't have to give them each of these. You would just choose one of the prompts. A dog can sit, a dog can beg, a dog can run. You would obviously model with the students. This would not be a part that could be done independently, certainly not for kindergarten. So you would need to be reading through, maybe just verbalizing, first of all, what the sentence is, having them repeat it to you, then having them echo it, then chorally do it, and then following with their finger. You will see that we've suggested that you have 3 crayon colors, yellow, green, and blue. And then go with them and model. Yellow, take out your yellow crayon. Miss Apperson's going to be our modeler. And you know what a sentence is, because at this point we already know we've been discussing what makes a sentence. Does it have a capital letter? And they would take their yellow crayon and isolate the capital letter. Yes, it does. Does it have a period? Yes, it does. That tells me that that is a sentence. So you would go through that stage first. The green crayon would be used for, does it have spaces between our words? And they would just have a little underlining of where those spaces are. Yes, there are spaces between my words. I can see those spaces. And then they would read the sentence. If it's a sentence, they would give themselves a blue check mark. You would do that with each of those sentences. A dog can sit, a dog can beg, a dog can run. We have then other models of that. A fireman, what can a fireman do? A fireman can help me, a fireman can drive a truck, a fireman can help us, just so that you're giving them some kind of clue as to what they're going to be expected to do when they have to do those items themselves. On the second time that you're meeting with that same group, there's my bug version, the bug can fly, a bug can eat, you're giving them pictures and you're talking about what those pictures are identifying. The first one is meant to be a policeman, recognizing that my clip arts skills are not necessarily as high level as they should be. That's why I'm not supplying things on pay teachers or anything. So this would be a policeman, and you would discuss what kinds of things a policeman can do and what they do for us. The next one's a cat. What does a cat do? The next one's supposed to be representing a mom, and the third one's a dad. Now this would be a model situation where you're talking to the kids about what skills they have and what those people do for them. And then the third activity would be, we've actually created handwriting papers. So for kindergarten, they would just be tracing a cop, and I use the word cop because obviously policeman's quite crazy for them. So cop is in CVC, so they should be able to read it. So they'd be then tracing a cop can, and then coming up with that last word on their own. So the item would be a cop can, and then even if they just start with one sentence, and then you could build it up to 2 sentences or 3 sentences. So we have the version for 3 different options. I think we did them for the cop, the cat, the mom, and the dad. So you could do those on a different day, so you're not all hitting them at the same time with those. But by that point, they're getting used to the idea of identifying what that person does for them. So when they hit that prompt of a kindergartner can, they should have a really good sense of what that is. Now, at the end of this, we do want to recognize the responsibilities back on the student to be able to identify whether or not they've done the job correctly. So they would take those crayons and they would then say, wait a minute, did I do a capital? Yes, I did. They would mark it in yellow. Did I end it with a period? Yes, I did. Mark it with the yellow. Do I have my spaces? They would use the green crayon. Yes, yes, yes. Blue, does it make sense? Yes. Give themselves a blue check. And Ms. Apperson has a checklist that we will be providing for you to use as a model that you could then give to each of the students to use for that literacy station. Does that make sense? All right, so moving on to first grade. Now, if you had higher level kindergartner kids, you obviously wouldn't have them tracing, but at this point we recognize that most of them probably need the tracing. So for first grade, the first grade actually have a pretty cool prompt. Their prompt, sorry, wrong placement. Their prompt, is this my first grade? Yes. Yeah. Is find the ways a bird and a bat are alike, and it's connected to reading a story, and the story is Bella Luna. Bless you. So what we've done is we have gone and followed the same thought process. There's a book, you're reading the story, you're looking at the things that can be modeled that are the same, and then you're going to be writing your own prompt. So one of the ways we changed it up for first graders is that we have given you model passages. A banana and an orange are the same as they're both fruit. One of the things I rocked about this is SRA used to do a program, does anybody remember, where you had to find the connecting items between bizarre things like hamburgers and ice cream? They're both food. They both take up space. So this was a skill that I was pretty ready for. You would obviously read through and talk about how they're the same, because a lot of times kids don't actually think about how things like this are the same unless it's very logical for them. So this will kind of help them understand how this is supposed to go. I have to peel both of those fruits. We can find them on trees. They grow on sunny farms. We like to eat them. They're both sweet and yummy. Again, you have 3 examples. You have a banana and an orange, a car and a bicycle, and the third one was, I believe I did, a bear and a deer. So that they... Yes. Okay. Yeah, yeah. Having spent some time in your class, yes, absolutely. No, your kids are great. But no, this would have to be modeled. And again, they would have the yellow crayon, the green crayon, and the blue crayon. And again, at this point, we're just trying to isolate that they understand what they're supposed to be looking for and what the trend is, and that they can recognize how to make that sentence. Does it have a capital? Does it have a period? Does it have spaces? Does it make sense? So they would follow that routine through. We also have books that we have as suggestions for the examples that we have for the actual literacy stations. So once they've done this, the next step would be to read a book.
Yep. And so like we have, if you give a mouse a cookie, and thank you, Kathleen, if you give a cat a cupcake, you can read both of those, and they can think about how a cookie and a cupcake are the same. Mm-hmm. We found plants and flowers, or like flowers and trees. You can read those and talk about how flowers and trees are the same, just to get their brains thinking. And then like a dog and a cow. How are a dog and a cow the same? So reading those books and having those discussions.
So if you read those books, then we've done the same thing, because we recognized hearing-wise, we've got some kids who can't write any of the words. So we have the same thing with the trace of the beginning of the sentences. It's not quite as... and so there it is, a cookie and a cupcake are the same. So it would it would correlate directly with the story that you chose to read. So we have the nonfiction aspect. So if you wanted to do the tree and flower, we have a page for that. If you wanted to start with the cookie and the cupcake, So you're going to talk about how they're the same. They would have had the example of the orange and the fruit. Then they move on to this page, and then they would, and we've got the cow and the dog are the same. So they would just trace those sentences and end them. And then the final prompt would be, Stella Luna, how are bats and birds the same? Does that make sense? Are there any concerns with that?
So
You're fine.
Only tier 3 kids are tracing the stuff. You don't need tier 1 kids.
You wouldn't need your tier 1 kids to do the tracing. It's just to kind of get them started. Or you could give them one sentence to trace and then ask them to do the remaining sentences on their own. The understanding is that they would be able to just say they both have or, and then move it on through that. Tiffany.
Okay, sorry. So you're saying this is a station. So the reading part we would do whole group.
You could, yes, and then give them, and then maybe the story.
Or
Yeah.
the writing part would be the station.
So you would have.
Part?
I would suggest you do the reading part, that part, whole group, and have them marking it up so that they can see that they're, because we've still got first graders who don't recognize that they've got, in fact, we've got second graders who don't recognize they need a capital and a period. So they would mark it up together, then you would probably want to read the story as a whole group and then ask them and discuss how are they the same, how are they different, and then give them the writing part independently,
Okay.
yes. And again, the same thing would be that we would have the checklist and they would at the end self-model, go back and self-check for themselves. Okay. Second grade's prompt, bit of a doozy, got to tell you, second grade. That was an interesting one. I believe the prompt is a good friend does or a good friend can. So this is a little more abstract for me, I think, as a complex thought process. These are based now, I recognize that the difference between tier 1 and 2 and 3 is very much larger. So I did try and create different passages for the higher kids versus the slightly lower kids. These would definitely have to be read though. And so the choices are a good teacher, the best granddad, and I believe the third one was a fireman. And what they're important, I tried to add more descriptive words and adjectives to try and encourage your tier 1 readers and writers. But I do have a slightly less aggressive passage for the tier 2 or 3 readers, which is a little more simplistic, that kind of would give them a bit more meat so that they can kind of say, oh, I can do that. So again, these would have to be read, but I did try to use words that they would be able to identify and decode on their own so that there's a little less kind of reliability on the teacher. Same kind of thing. In this situation, though, because it's informational, we have suggested that we have a slightly different checklist at the end because you're wanting to know that they've identified the facts. But again, it's the same process. You want to give them these passages, read them with them, talk about what they mean, have them mark it up. Does they have a start, a capital? Does it have a period? Is it making sense? Does it have the spaces? So that they're getting the gist of how those paragraphs are supposed, or those writings are supposed to look. Okay, for the second grade prompt, I kind of thought that this was a good idea because this can be done independently. They choose a picture and they're using the picture to decide how things are the same. Why would these animals make a good pet? The choice is a unicorn and a dragon, just because we want to make sure we get everybody's interests involved. But then they would be able to see those pictures. Now, if you're pretty cool, you could do them in color, but I just did them in black and white because I'm not that cool. But the point is that you would be able to kind of say, oh, a unicorn would make a great pet because it's got a beautiful horn, it's got a, so that they can identify from the picture what items would make that a good pet. We've done animals would be the two first. The first writing prompt would be based on that. The next one would be what about this makes it the best toy. I try to do a male version or a boy-orientated one and a girl-orientated one. Anybody can write about anything. Thank you for that. So the next one would be about toys. What makes this a good toy or the best toy? And the third one that we're looking at is seasonal. What makes the summer the best? And I just the pictures of beach. So I'm assuming that they recognize, and you could discuss this as summer versus winter. What makes summer the best season? What makes winter the best season? So they would be able to choose that prompt, and then they're going to write the introduction sentence. Now in the file, you will see for second grade there is a slightly different checklist, and that says introduction sentence and then the factual. Does it have 3 facts and a concluding sentence? So we thought that this way we'd be able to do those items and hopefully help them with that support on that information.
And I can still give second grade the other checklist because there's also the visuals for like making sure there's a capital, like there's pictures, so you can do either or.
So that they can have more responsibility for kind of self-checking before they hand it over and just say, is it right? Are there any questions from second graders to those suggestions or ideas? Okay. And if anybody needs to, I'm happy to come in and kind of help try to run a couple stations if you feel like that would be something. Not that I'm anything amazing, but I'm certainly able to kind of offer that support if anybody wanted us to do that, just to kind of see if we could get the ball rolling. Perfect. So now we're going to split up. If you were interested in watching Miss Apperson do spelling stations that do not include Rainbow Write and pyramids, then that's it. And if you wanted to talk about concept of word, I'm going to go next door to Miss Levier's room. Thank you so much. You're on. All right. So in the second half of this, we're just going to be talking about concept of word. This is something that we have been working on as a county for 2-3 years. And we have recognized that there's a definite correlation. Not only is it a large part of your PALS test, but there's a definite correlation between concept of word abilities in kindergarten and reading fluency by 3rd grade. So we do know that kids who can recognize and memorize their letters and their sounds doesn't mean they can read, it doesn't mean they understand how to understand or break apart a sentence. So the schools came together, made a warehouse, which is pretty awesome. Kathleen was involved in the warehouse and I've been involved in the warehouse. And in that warehouse on Google Drive, we have a variety of resources that can be used for concept of word. I am, however, going to be modeling some of the items that we have for Tier 3, Tier 2, and Tier 1 students. So one of the things I did want to push is when we did the warehouse, we actually here at Emerald Hill have the warehouse created in hard copy. If you come to my room and navigate your way through the disorganizational piles, you will see that we actually have the tubs, and in those tubs I've actually marked them. We have the phonetic awareness, we've got concept of print, concept of word, we have alphabet knowledge, we have them all broken down. So you can come to the room, you can take one of the packets, I have them in sets of 10, so you'd be able to use them as a small group and then just return them when you're finished and move on to the next one. If we don't have them printed and laminated, I'm happy to get that organized so that we have got that printed and laminated. Not only do we have them in that system, but I have my handy dandy box of pebbles, little glass seats, and you can come in marbles, the little stones, and you can come and choose these as well. You just take a handful. I've got some bags. In the ideal world, I was going to provide you all with little, then I realized I didn't have the money. So we went with this instead. So, all right. So the first thing we're going to talk about is if you are kindergarten students who have not mastered actual print or letters or words yet, we don't want to start with concept of words. You actually want to start with concept of print. And Martina, you probably have students who would be working on concept of print, as do you, Doreen, obviously. So concept of print is pretty cool. One of the things that we would say is that these are all stations that would take more than one day. And obviously this is from the warehouse. So you have an option of number, letter, word, and then sentence. And what you would do is you would first of all, obviously we recognize that at this point of the year we've been in school for 2 months, so we recognize we've been talking about parts of the book and reading to these students, so they do have a sense of how the book works. You would take these and put them on the table and then talk about what makes it a number, how do we know that this is a letter versus a word or a number, a word and a sentence. And then you would model, let me just put my little labels down. This is a letter. This letter says A. It could be a word because it could say A for I see a cat or I see a dog. We are going to recognize that in this scenario, this is a letter. So I would talk about the fact that A says A. This is a capital, and I'm going to put it under the letter pile. We have the letters here. We have lowercase. We have capital letters involved. We have words that they can recognize. So I would, if I were doing this station model for them, I'm going to choose this item. What does this item say? If I don't recognize if it's a number or a letter, I'm going to talk about how I can recognize it to be a number or a letter, and then place it in the correct pile. Once you've modeled words, here's a number, so that we do recognize that we have the examples of every option that they have. You're going to give them an opportunity to actually sort those letters, the remaining letters and numbers with you. We have some sentences in here as well, so that they can recognize. For me, at this point, one of the major things to do is to say, we see that there's a capital, we see there's a period, we see that there are spaces between the words. We can recognize that we can see some sight words. Can is a sight word that may have been introduced at this point. Talk about how they can isolate those items into the different formats and then sort them with you, and then give them the opportunity to sort. So that would probably be day 1 and day 2. I don't know that I would do that all in day 1. I would probably do that in day 2. I myself would also probably add some extra items in the sense of magnets, like alphabet letters and alphabet numbers and different formats of word, maybe some from magazines and stuff, so that they see that it's not just the ones that look pretty on paper, so that they get the idea that they can come from any kind of aspect. So I would include those in that sort. Once that sort's been done, the next item on the sort is this page, which again is based on, it's laminated, it's in the warehouse. So even though it says at the top, please mark letters with red and numbers with blue, I'd appreciate it if I do have colored discs. I would rather that you borrow my colored discs and get them to color disc them, because the red and blue stay in the items and then everybody knows what they're doing. So for day 3, I would just spend day 3 saying independently, take this item and see if you can recognize which ones are the numbers and which ones are the letters. Now you probably do have some kids like this who are still at this point. If they're not, then you would just move straight on to the second side, which definitely has words and sentences. And when they're looking at the words and sentences, I would then practice reading those sentences orally, having them echo them back to me, and then actually pinpointing each word before they moved on. This would be a concept of print, not a concept of word skill. So this would be for your tier 3 students, more so than the concept of word skill that we would do. Does anybody have any questions on concept of print or on a tier 3 skill? Do you think you'd be able to use it in your room, Ash?
I have a couple of friends that are going to be ready to use that.
That'd be awesome. So you can certainly come and borrow it. And I do have the magnet letters and magnet numbers as well, so that you can use those as well. Beautiful. So that would be tier 3. If I were to look at my tier 2 students, this would probably be something that I would do for most of my students, again from the handy dandy warehouse filing. One of the things that we do recognize is that with the laminating, we try to laminate so that they would be a little hardier. It does, however, mean that they get a little twisted up, so I just fold them backwards. This is an example that follows through. There are pictures on the page. Day 1, and again, this is a skill that would be offered over more than one day. This would be a day 4 to 5 day activity. If you want, I'm happy to come into the classroom and model this one as well. We also have it on video on the warehouse, and the person who does it is a reading specialist. She does an awesome job of breaking it down and showing us how it's done with the students. I'm happy to show you where it is. I think it's pretty, but yeah, it's pretty cool to watch, and she does a variety of these. So the first job would be that you would just give them the visual, and you would just read the poem to them. You would not give them the words of the poem, because at this point you just want them to listen and understand what the poem is. It's I touch my head, I touch my toes, I touch my knees, I touch my nose. For the first day, all you would do would be practicing that poem. You would show them the pictures, you would ask them to repeat the sentence, echo it to you, then read it orally with you, and just focus on recognizing that they can verbally repeat those sentences to you. If they are able to do that, you would give them the glass pebbles. They would need 6, even though they're not 6 words, you give them 6 anyway, because you want them to actually have to consciously think about what they're doing. They would line them up at the bottom of the page, and then as they say the words, they push the pebble to the space. I, for each word. I touch my head, 4 words. So they would consciously be moving it as they say the word. Now you've got to watch them, because sometimes they're just like, I touch my, they're not actually focused. So it needs to be a little bit like when you teach one-to-one correlation for counting. 1 word, 1 push. You practice that skill with each sentence. Then you move the pebbles back down, and you do that repetitively until you feel comfortable that they recognize the different words that they're saying. So that would be a day 1 skill. Day 2 skill, you would give them the same poem, but this time you're actually giving them the words. You're asking them to repeat the poem, and this time, instead of just saying them with you, they're going to be tracking those words with you while they say them. So the same process, you would be repeating the words, they would echo them with you, then they would do it chorally with you, and they would just focus on recognizing. Again, if you feel like you've got kids who can't track and aren't really doing it, the pushing of the pebbles is good, because it gives them a purpose, and it helps them focus on what they're doing. So they would just push a pebble to the word, I touch my head. They would follow through on that for day 2. Day 3, you would give them the individual sentence. I have another example, which is underneath all my files. And you, oh, that's not the sentence. You would break the sentence. I'm just going to show it up to you here. You would actually have to make a copy of one of these sentences. You would cut the strips. You would give them each of a strip for each sentence. Ask them to read it with the tracking skill again. Then you're going to let them actually cut the words out. So you're going to cut that sentence up into different words, and then ask them to actually jumble them up and then put them back in the correct order. So if you've got kids that are kind of struggling with that skill, I would repeat the sentence to them once they've cut them up and jumbled them up, and then make sure that they're moving the words into the correct order when they're saying those sentences and pushing. Once they've done that skill, that would be just a day 3 skill. Day 4 skill, we'd be giving them the whole poem, they'd be cutting them into strips and being able to identify how to move those sentences around and those words around. So that would be the basis for the one for general students, for average students. If you had higher students, it would actually move on to a slightly more complex poem. So it follows the exact same process as the one that we just talked about, which is the touch my head, touch my knees, touch my toes, touch my nose. But this one's a much more complex poem for me. It doesn't kind of roll off the tongue as easily, so it takes more time and it's a little bit more complex. What time is it? What time is it? What time is it? What time is it today? It's time for bed. Put down your head. It's time for sleep today. Again, same process. Day 1, you're just reading that poem to them. You're just making sure that they're echoing it back to you. They're making choral conversation. They're doing and following it after you. And you're pushing the pebbles as well for each of those words and making sure that they can follow the same process. And then you're building on that skill on day 2 and day 3 and day 4 in exactly the same way that you've done on the tier 2 or the average student. Does anybody have any questions on how they'd be able to apply concept of word? Martina, is it something you think you could use in your room?
For some of them. Some of them we're still trying to get concept right.
And that's fine, because we've got the concept of print, and I'm happy to help you find other forms of concept of print to kind of change it up so that they are getting some variety and not sticking with the same items.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to come and kind of model that for you if anybody needed them to. So if you certainly as a new teacher or as somebody who needs kind of a refresher, watching the videos online would be an awesome resource. It's in Google, it's on shared drive.
We saw some at our reading meeting.
Yes, we did the item there, and I'm also again happy to come in and actually model for you. Or certainly use Kathleen, she's a good resource because she's on that warehouse on the committee, so we're certainly a way to be helpful. Thank you. Beautiful. All right.